Hey there. If you're looking to dominate players rated under 1500, you're in the right place. And today we're diving into one of the most explosive ways to seize control early on, the Scotch gambit. Pawn to e4, pawn to e5. Knight to f3, knight to c6. Now pawn to d4, attacking the central pawn and also preparing the potential to push forward and chase away the opposing knight. Therefore, black will almost always capture the pawn on d4, expecting you to recapture. But here comes the first surprise for your opponent. You play bishop to c4. You prioritize quick development over immediately recapturing the pawn. You can always take that pawn back later if needed, but for now, your goal is to develop your pieces rapidly and start applying pressure on your opponent. In this position, your opponent will usually continue developing, either their bishop or their knight. The most commonly played move is knight to f6. That starts to look threatening, as it's attacking your pawn, but that is not a problem. As soon as the knight comes out, you can simply push your pawn forward to a5 and chase the knight away. What I really love about the Scotch gambit is that your opponent needs to be very well prepared in this line. There's no easy way for them to just make normal developing moves and still get a good position. That doesn't work against the Scotch gambit. They need to know precise opening theory. For example, in this position, here's a quick spoiler. The only good move for black that really keeps them in the game is the counterintuitive counterblow. But certainly beginner to intermediate level players are rarely even aware of this idea. And even if they are, it's still not easy for them to handle. Now, let's take a look at the more natural moves that beginner players typically go for in this position. Here, black's knight has to move somewhere. They definitely do not want to retreat it back to g8. That's just too passive. If they move the knight to e4, it might seem active, but it's actually quite vulnerable. Notice how your pawn on e5 cuts off several escape squares, so the knight is almost trapped. Later, you can always attack it with your bishop or rook, especially once you open up the e-file. So knight to e4 is not a great option for black either. The most common move played by beginners and intermediate players is knight to g4. The idea here is they're hoping for a double attack. They're targeting your pawn on a5 and hoping it will buy them time to finish developing their pieces. But here comes another unpleasant surprise for them. Now, if you're facing a really strong player, sure, you could just castle and slowly build up your attack. But let's be honest, strong players usually won't fall into knight to g4 in the first place. So, against a beginner or intermediate level opponent, you go straight for it. Bishop takes on f7, a sacrifice that often ends the game very quickly. They are forced to capture the bishop, and now you play knight to g5 with a check. At the same time, this also creates a discovered attack on their knight. So your idea here is simple. You're going to get your material back, and in the process, you've dragged their king into the open, making it even easier to keep attacking. Now, the most common reply from black is to retreat the king back to g8, trying to tuck it away in the corner. And here's another nice little trick. Instead of immediately recapturing the knight, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, you can play a much trickier move, queen to f3. Now your opponent will likely notice that you're setting up something similar to the scholar's mate, queen to f7 checkmate, and they'll definitely try to stop it. So they'll play one move or another to guard that square. But here's the tricky part. You actually have a second hidden idea. It's queen to d5 with check, a sneaky left hook that most players completely overlook, and even if they do notice it, finding the correct defense is not easy at all, especially under pressure. So if your opponent plays knight, takes a 5, or makes any other move that defends the f7 square, thinking they've stopped your main threat, you simply go for your backup plan. Queen to d5 with check. And that's game over. Yes, this can literally lead to checkmate in just 10 moves if black plays natural-looking moves without knowing the proper defenses. Now, the second most common move that black plays in this position is developing their bishop, often to c5, while also guarding their extra central pawn. But here's what you do. You attack that central pawn again, and now, if your opponent doesn't respond accurately, you can capture the pawn later while also putting pressure on their bishop. And if they play another natural-looking move, like capturing your pawn on c3, thinking they're just simplifying the position, that's already a losing mistake. Think about how crazy that is. Black seems to be playing logical, standard developing moves, and yet, after your bishop takes on f7 with check, they're basically already lost. This is a similar tactical idea that comes up often, sacrificing something on the f7 square. That square is one of the most vulnerable spots in your opponent's position, especially early in the game, so after bishop takes on f7 and the king captures, you follow up with queen to d5. This creates a powerful double attack. You're hitting both the king and the bishop at the same time. Just like in the earlier variation, the goal is to win your material back. But more importantly, you're dragging the king out into the open, making it a wide open target for the rest of your attack. Now, after the king retreats, instead of immediately taking the bishop, you can add a clever in-between check, queen to h5. This forces your opponent to push their g-pawn to g6, weakening their king side even further. Then you recapture the bishop, but now you've created an additional weak diagonal that will help you later in the attack. For example, the pawn on c3 is currently hanging. You can likely take it with your knight. And if black tries to grab the b2 pawn themselves, thinking they're gaining material, it actually backfires. You simply recapture, and now you're threatening the rook on a 1. Notice how helpful it is that their pawn is now on g6 instead of g7. It no longer guards that long diagonal, which means your clear path to attack the rook. It's a great position for white. And taking your other pawn on b2 only helps you develop your bishop. So in reality, black's captures are actually doing you a favor. Black might try to ignore the rook threat and focus on completing development, but it doesn't really help much, because now you're still threatening the rook, and the real issue for black is not even material, it's that their king is stuck in the center of the board. And there's another big problem too, that painful double knight fork threat sitting in the background, ready to appear. Even if black manages to defend against it, your plan remains simple. Push your pawn to a5, break open the center, and go straight for the king. Even though the idea is straightforward, there's not much black can do to stop it. If black tries queen to a7, you can respond with rook to e1 and then push pawn to a5, or even break open the center immediately. Your position is so strong that you can temporarily sacrifice a knight, bring your rook to a 1, and on the next move, start hitting the king and queen with overwhelming pressure. Everything is pinned, and you're likely to win within a few moves. The third most common move from black is pawn to h6. It makes some sense. Your bishop is eyeing f7, and they fear a knight to g5 idea leading to a fried liver-style attack. But the big drawback? They're wasting time instead of developing. That gives you a chance to speed up your attack. One move I love here is pawn to c3, calmly offering them the chance to capture on c3 while you're setting up an even stronger attack. After they capture on c3, don't even recapture, just castle. You're basically playing a stronger version of the Danish gambit since they wasted time with pawn to h6. If they do nothing, you can take back later. If they take, you get 2 powerful bishops and a huge lead in development. If they try to develop with knight to f6, you push pawn to e5 and chase it around. If they play pawn to d6 to control the center, you're still way ahead. Just bring your rook to e1 and break the center open. Queen to b3 is also strong, creating threats along the b3 to f7 diagonal. If they try to pin your knight, ignore it and push in the center anyway. Even if they capture, you can sacrifice your queen. And after they take it, your bishop checks. If they block, you can play knight takes c6 and you win. If they avoid that by moving the king to a7, you finish with knight to g6, a fancy double checkmate.